Welcome to 80s TV Ladies. Here are your hosts, Sharon Jansen and Susan Lambert-Haddam.
Hello, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. Today's guest is a true 80s TV lady and will share with us some of her experiences acting on classic 70s and 80s television.
Sharon, you never know where you're going to find an 80s TV lady. Let me tell you, I was at a play reading, and the playwright turned out to be none other than Miss Elayne Heilveil. So, of course, we had to get her on the show. I know it feels like, dear listeners, that all I do is go to parties and play events and run into amazing, cool actresses. And I'd like to think that my life is always like that, even though it isn't. However, since I've been doing 80s TV Ladies, it does feel like sometimes it is like that. So keep it coming, universe. Let's hope I run into Debbie Allen and Janet Jackson next.
Would that it were so. The aforementioned Ms. Elayne Heilveil is an actress, director, and award-winning playwright. As an actress, she starred in numerous film, television, and theater productions, including being directed by such greats as Mike Nichols and Mark Rydell in the first season of ABC's Family.
She has guested on so many shows from that time period, like Rockford Files, The Waltons, Hawaii Five-0, Hill Street Blues, and Mary Tyler Moore.
She starred in the cult classic film Payday with Rip Torn and numerous TV movies, including A Cry for Help opposite Robert Culp, Birds of Prey opposite David Jansen, and along with Dame Judith Anderson, appeared in The Chinese Prime Minister. She is also a voice actor, narrating audio classics like Wuthering Heights.
As a playwright, she has been published by Dramatic Publishing, Applause Books, and Smith & Krause.
Please welcome to 80s TV Ladies, Miss Elayne Heilveil.
Hi.
Hello, we're so happy to have you here.
So, Elayne,
Yes.
We are fascinated to hear your story. How did you get started in Hollywood and becoming an actress?
Well, I started in the 5th grade and I had to read some poem in class. And I thought, I don't know. And my brother gave me this last minute thing, and it was called The Creation by James Weldon Johnson. And he was a Black poet and pastor, and he wrote this amazing sermon. And I thought, I can't read this. This is just gorgeous. It's about it was called The Creation and how God created, but I had nothing else. So I was embarrassed, and I read this thing in front of my 4th or 5th grade class. And all of a sudden I was like this thin, and this voice comes out of nowhere. And it was like Amy McPherson or whatever. Yeah, Amy, the great orator and God said, and I was really embarrassed, and tears started coming down my, cheeks, and let there be light. And, into it, he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. And something took over, and everybody kind of went like that, including myself. And I was embarrassed. And I won the declamation contest, and I did just and I was shaking when I said, into it, he blew the breath of life, and then I auditioned for the High School of Performing Arts. I actually wanted to be a dancer, but I never had any dance classes. So I did, my little poem, and I did some Blind Girl from a letter from Miss Lonely Heart. And I got into performing arts in New York. And that was pretty special. I mean, at 15, you're riding on the subways and stepping over bodies on 46th Street in New York. But I was traveling from Queens, so it was like 2 buses and subways, and you're kind of on your own. And at that time, there were like topless go-go dancers on bars and a lot of inebriated people on the streets that you thought were dead, and you were afraid of stepping over them. And you went, and I probably saw the most talent then and there, even in all my working years. And I think, and because it had nothing to do with money, it had nothing to do with where you came from. It was such an eclectic mix of people. And some people came with no shoes, because you didn't have to pay to go there. It was all your talent. And I really think it saved lives at that time, because people either would have shot up or there was a lot of trauma going on in backgrounds that made us, I thought maybe I was too normal to be an actress, but it turned out, I found out later that I wasn't all that normal and I did have issues, but compared to a lot of what was going on. So you saw all this exuberance, and dancers in the afternoon were dancing at lunchtime. And,
so this is what, the movie and the TV show Fame are kind of based on.
And I got to tell you, the movie and the show, in reality, it was much even richer because the stories that were very personal, the teachers had their own stuff, so, and we were introduced at that time to like the beginnings of method acting and, so we had all this. And when there was a fire drill on 46th and Broadway, we'd be walking down in groups of people that in costumes as witches and old people and old age makeup. Now we look at our friends that are still around and it's like, it looks like you didn't take your makeup off from old age class. What happened? So that's where I started. And then I did summer stock in the summers. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon University after that. And, then went to New York after and, continued to do my summer stock. And I met an agent there. I met a friend of mine who on the street who had an agent, said, you got to call, somebody. I called this big agent, I guess. And I walked in and she said, you can do it. You can have this name. I've been looking for somebody that could have this name and you can do it. And I said, yeah. And she said, Daisy Astor. And I said, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Elayne Heilveil didn't exactly, it's been an albatross, but I did not go with Daisy Astor.
You did not go with Daisy Astor.
I did not go with Daisy Astor, but I did get a phone call from her, saying, I have an appointment for you. Franco Zeffirelli is in town and he's doing Romeo and Juliet. And I set up an appointment for you. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I'm going up to Pennsylvania to do summer stock. I mean, it was just a different mentality. And then I kind of burned myself out from a lost love in college. And I was coughing and got pneumonia in Central Park. There's this music playing the Beatles, it's a long and winding road, da, 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 and I'm crying copiously in Central Park, breaking down, coughing. And I go and do a show a week in summer stock and I'm just exhausted. And the last day I come down with 104 fever, pneumonia. And my parents had moved to LA and I thought, I need help. And I came out to LA and, stayed with them for not that long, went into the hospital.
Oh no.
Yes.
Oh my.
And I broke a rib from coughing so much and it took a while to heal, but I met an agent kind of via New York to here and sent me on an audition for a film called Payday. And I was reading my first kind of film script. There was no dialogue in film scripts. It was a whole different world. So I was not snotty, but I think I must have had an inner attitude. And I went to this interview, and there was an 8x10 photo of an actress who I knew that looked like was going to get the part. It was a Southern groupie. And this was my only experience that was like this. So I'm prefacing it by saying that. The casting director said, well, there's actually a scene in the movie where the character is topless. So I have to see what that's going to look like.
And how old are you at this point?
I'm like 22. I just graduated, and I looked at him. I just broke out laughing, and I said, "You've got to be kidding! Are women buying this?" I mean, and it was like, "You kidding me?" You know? And he was like, right. And he makes a phone call, and he calls the director. I didn't know who he was talking to. And he said, I think you need to come down here and meet this girl. So they said, could you hang out for a little while? And I guess the director was staying nearby, and he came over, and I said, sure. And, he said, do you mind, can we just take a walk and talk or something? And I said, yeah, I had nothing much to do that day. That was my appointment. And I remember we took a walk on the street. It was the studio on Gower.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I just remember walking down the street. I don't remember what we were talking about. He was just asking me questions. And it was like, okay, nice to meet you. It was Daryl Duke, the director. And that was it. And the next thing I knew, they asked if I would do a screen test. But it turned out later, after we got to know each other, Daryl and I, and worked together, many times after that. He said, one of the reasons why you got the film. And I said, no, I did a really good screen test, which your nerves take over, and it's sometimes helpful. And he said, because when I asked if you would just take a walk with me and talk, you were like, sure, I'll go. And that was the character. She was a groupie that went on a road trip with a country western singer. And it was that attitude that he picked up. Cut to a few years later, I had actually, it sounds like I have a history of this, but it wasn't. I had some minor surgery the day before, and I got a call to read for a Hill Street Blues. And I remember walking into the audition, and I had on this big, cowl neck sweater. I just threw it on, and I walked in, and there's all of the producers of the show, which were 20, were sitting there. And I slumped in my seat for the reading, not intentionally. And I read the part, and it was a part of a Patty Hearst kind of character. And I found out later, one of the reasons I got that part, again, they said to me after I got cast, they said, do you mind wearing that sweater that you wore? Because you came in and you sort of sunk in your sweater, and it was like you were sinking. And the character had been in hiding for years, and she was coming out of shock from being caught and everything. And I went, you could never, ever plan anything like that. You couldn't do these things consciously. So that plus nerves can get you far.
Well, and I think that's, I've helped a lot of actors and actresses with their audition tapes, and it's almost never about you.
It's not.
Right. It's about
it really
whatever they're looking for. If you walk in and you suddenly present with something that matches, And then it also has to do with who else they're casting, what the network is doing, what somebody ate for lunch that day. You just have to sort of keep auditioning.
And the other thing is, I think there was something in me, and maybe it was like coming up from the subways and the streets when you're young, that kind of knew that. And so for anybody that's auditioning and stuff, it's so not about you, exactly what you're saying. You come in with who you are, and somehow at that time, I don't think I could do it now. Too much life has happened, and in a way, you can become more self-conscious in some strange way because you have layers that you didn't have then. I didn't have that kind of desperation, I guess, because I had those years before, 8 years of, performing arts in Carnegie. But it's so about not personal,
But about being, like in some ways, the more you can be both yourself into that character in that moment, whether you're feeling bad, like in kind of using whatever you have.
Using who you are and what do that.
And you have a cat visiting.
Yes, and I tried to put him in the back room, but
that's okay. We love cats.
He wouldn't hear of it.
He wouldn't. Yes, they do. They do what they want.
That's Murphy.
Hi, Murphy.
It's quite all right. He's
Murphy's
lovely.
Law.
To go back to Payday.
Yes.
When they were asking you to take your shirt off, that was for the role that you ended up getting, or was that for a different role?
That was for the role that I ended up getting. And okay. We can free associate.
Yes.
Is this okay?
Yeah, that's what we do best.
Yes. So there was a scene with Rip Torn where my character they were in bed together, and the scene opens with him rolling off of me. And we go to shoot it. That was it. That was the only thing. And we go to shoot it. And I said to the director, and we pin the blanket, up so that when he rolls over, it doesn't go down. Cause I was not into that, and he said, yeah. So we start the scene, and, I have the blanket kind of tucked up to here, and Rip is on top of me, and he rolls over, and he takes the blanket with him. And so the blanket goes down to here, the middle of one's boob. And I'm like, and the director and the cameraman said, no, don't worry. We're only shooting here up. Nothing happened. So it was like this. Okay. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Cut to, I see the movie, and it turns out there's a half boob shot. They lied.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I just looked away for an eighth of a second, and that was kind of the extent of it. Cut to years later, I meet somebody, some friend of mine, this guy, and I said, oh yeah, I acted or something like that. So he goes and looks me up, and he goes, the first thing that comes up when you look your name up. And I said, no. And he said, Elayne Heilveil, nude shots.
Oh my goodness.
And it was like, what? I didn't even remember. And there was a shot. And I said to actually my brother, how do they even find these things? There's no stills of this or anything. And he said, they freeze frame and then they post it. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
According to my ex's Wikipedia, we're still married, and that was 20 years ago. So I've never been one to, somebody said to me once, you're starring in 3 things this week and nobody knows who you are, and I was just always very insular and kind of private and didn't know from PR or anything like that. So it's just I never had illusions of being famous or anything like that. I just wanted to try to do good work and feel good about the work. You know?
Just so you feel good now, I, of course, had to go track down all of your credits and all that stuff. So we've been Googling you a lot, and I have not come across any nefarious photos of you.
I haven't either.
Okay, good. So this must have been nobody's interested anymore.
No. Your search history is based on what you've searched before. So if you are searching for new photos of people and then you search somebody, it might come up. Right.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not something I normally search.
Yes, that's
so I'll
true.
give you that.
That's true. You know, we could do a whole segment on that alone. But I think other than that, honestly, I have never, ever had that used in a way. It felt, and maybe it was because I did more television and it was faster. So the higher up you went for me, and we're not talking about the Harvey Weinsteins and things like that, but the more kind of class people had and the more humble. I mean, you meet like Mike Nichols and, and they were just, writing you personal notes after an audition. I mean, and they treated you with such kindness. I remember when I went up for this series, Family.
Mm-hmm. That was produced by Mike Nichols.
And Mike Nichols and Mark Rydell, who directed on Golden Pond, yes, and just lovely, lovely, and started out as an actor. They were the ones who cast it. They were the only ones there. And I remember going in, and there were two other actresses waiting in the room to go in. And I guess it had been down to us. And Mike Nichols asked me, he said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "It's just the weirdest thing. I'm not nervous at all." And he said, "Yeah, I know." He said, right before I went on he used to do Nichols and May,
yes,
he said, "I would fall asleep." He said, "There's a name for that. And there's some long name that you're so nervous that you're almost dead." He said, and he just, it was like, but you were just treated kind of like with respect. And I think that's what I felt higher up. I never really worked for people that were in another category that was like, the hair in order. Mm-hmm. I mean, when they left Family, they did the pilot and they left, and they kind of got their credit for consulting and stuff like that. Spelling Goldberg took over, and it became a Spelling Goldberg situation. And I was not that. They would say, "Fix her hair," and Mark would just say, "Leave her alone," And so I think I just was not like a regular type. And some people recognize that. I mean, I was doing something once and I was starring in some TV movie and I was standing off to the side and a few people, passerbys, were watching them shoot. And they said, "Oh, they're doing a movie. Who's starring in this?" And I said, "I am." And they said, No, really, who's starring in it?" And I said,
"No, it's me."
No. Coming from theater, my theater background people would say, if they saw me in something, "What did they do to you?" Because it's a different medium. Mm-hmm. And if I was doing it now, I think that I'd have a whole different way of kind of navigating because it's less dimensional, So now we get kind of grittier stuff, mm-hmm. I think.
Yeah.
The material is grittier. The characters back then, like in the 70s or 80s, they were much more Girls in Jeopardy and, things like that.
And I was going to talk about, you did a lot of that, right?
Mm-hmm. I did a lot of that. And they were token they were the better roles, but they were token roles. and I always thought if I ever did which I wouldn't, like a memoir or something, it would be called Get the Girl, because there would be shots of me having a brain tumor, having locked in a straitjacket, being jumped out of helicopters and running and being suicidal, like different cuts of girl in jeopardy. And the AD or the assistant director would call you and they'd say, get the girl, because you almost didn't have a name. It was the girl in trouble, in jeopardy, So I think it's a little different now, and performances can be a lot richer and multi-leveled, and you can see more. But it's a very different skill, and it so depends on using yourself in a different way.
To film
and television. Even film is different than television.
That is so interesting. Sharon Gless talked about that. She talked about,
did she?
Yeah, she talked about the difference. She said, I think I'm built for, I love my relationship with the lens.
Yes. You just want moments that feel like you're really there,
like you're really
with
connecting.
Somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a lot of things that were, a girl committing suicide.
That's the call-in
Cry
show.
For Help.
Cry for Help.
Yeah.
With Robert Culp. And I was going to ask you, I was like, what was it like to work with him? And I'm like, you probably didn't.
We did. I never met him.
Oh, that's too bad.
Never met him. But what I did do on that show was, I wore Columbo's trench coat in the whole show.
Are you serious? How did that happen?
We went to the wardrobe department and I was going to be in a trench coat. And, actors, when they wear the same thing, have doubles and triples of the same thing. And on it was a tag that said Columbo.
That's awesome.
So I was wearing Columbo's trench coat in the whole TV movie.
And were you basically the whole time going, Peter Falk was wearing this?
I am in Peter Falk's skin. But the thing about that was that was based on a kind of a true story.
Mm-hmm.
And a girl called into a talk show, and the talk show guy was very rash and harsh, and she said, something like, is life worth living? I don't remember what the lines were, but she was definitely in need and in trouble. And he came back with some snarky comment and said, well, then why don't you off yourself, or some, if life is so crappy, why don't you do that? And then all these people call in and say, how could you say that? And then they start looking for her. So it cuts back and forth between him and me in terms of searching for me where I was. And at the end of that script, she ends up being saved the last minute. And I was talking to the director and I said, I don't think she should be saved, because this is real. And it's not where everybody gets saved at the last minute. So if somebody is really thinking about this, they've got to know that there's consequences. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that was real, and that really happened. And the comment back was, we cannot show a violent death on ABC at that time of a girl. So it had to be that way.
Did you find that you often were in a situation or found yourself speaking to the director or someone else in the production about your thoughts about what was going on with your character or what was happening?
Yeah, there was one time when I thought I was really proud of myself, and one time when I was really not. And you have to be so careful with that in terms of where you are with it. The time that I was really proud of myself and when I figured something out, in that moment, I was doing a Waltons and I was playing a blind girl. And I had this really long speech about what it felt like to be blind. And I was like, you don't understand, what it feels like. Long, long speech, which was most actors would be thrilled. And I read it and I thought, this doesn't sound right. I can't say this. It doesn't feel honest. It felt kind of like a cliche idea of it. And I thought, I'm just a guest. I'm a guest star. I'm not a regular. And I don't even know if a regular. And so I can't go to the writer and say anything. I can't go to the director and say anything. It's like, who do you think you are? And this also goes back to Payday because there's a lot of situations like that. And I thought, I don't want to say this. I mean, it's cutting my lines. It's not real. And I thought, I'm going to the top. And I went to Richard Thomas.
I was going to say, you went to John Boy.
John Boy. And I thought, who could I go to? And very privately, and I didn't really know him, I said, Richard, you see these lines? I said, somehow, I don't know. What do you feel? What if you said them? Like, I said, because it's not feeling right that I'm saying them, but if you say them, I can then say, and I ended up just pounding on his chest without really saying those words. It was like, no, you don't know. And then he got to say, I know it feels like this. And it's like, no. And he was happy because he got more lines. And I was like, yes, I did the right thing,
Yeah.
And then, so that was one brownie point. I have two.
I bet you have a lot more brownie points that you may not.
That was it. I got another one. The director told me to not do something.
Can you say what show? What movie?
Well, one incident was in Family.
Okay.
The first season. Everybody was wonderful, but it was a director that Seda Thompson, the lead actress, was like her director, and we were doing a scene together. And I started to cry. She was saying something to me and I started to cry and it felt appropriate to me, And he said, no, I don't want you to do that. And he said, just don't do anything. It's your face. You know what I mean? It's okay. And I didn't know what to do. I did not know what to do. And it was early on in the season and, and I spoke to an actor friend of mine and I said, what should I do? And he said, you can go, okay. And then when the camera rolls, you just do what you do and it's on film.
No, didn't take that advice.
Did not go over well. I have never, ever been yelled at.
Oh my.
And I think, and says nothing against any Seda was great. It had nothing against that. But I think he really was wanting to protect who he was protecting and put the focus there, And he did not want some younger actress, you know what I mean, to make it look like it was about her, And so that happened on that. And then when I was doing Payday, there were a lot of scenes. And as an actor, you look at the structure of something and I'm going, well, this is the turning point of her character. She was in a department store with Rip Torn and everybody was falling all over him. And she gets to see why she was so enamored and takes the trip with him, because he's such a big deal. And this scene was in a department store. And I didn't even have anything to say. It wasn't about that, but it was me experiencing the glory of being in the glory of somebody,
Yeah.
And so I got to be Google-eyed. And it turned out right before we were shooting that the writer, Don Carpenter, was there and the director, and he said, we're cutting that scene. Mm. And that happened a lot in television too, is that you take a part and it's a lot richer than you think it is. And then you get pink pages and yellow pages and orange pages because, they have to cut it for time, for money, whatever. And he said, no, I mean, we have to cut it, and it's not integral to it. And I'm sure budget wise, it was exterior with a lot of,
Yeah.
And I said, no, you can't cut that scene. It's the turning point and blah, blah. And he said, well, you go home. And we were all staying like at a, Motel 6 in Georgia somewhere, mm-hmm. and you give me like 5 reasons why we should keep this scene. So I do my homework and I give him the 5 reasons thinking, okay, So he looks at it and he reads it and he says, oh, little girl, you've got a lot to learn. Okay. So that was that. Oh, and then reviews came out. And the first review in the New York Times of the first thing that you do says, basically, this movie is awful. It's blah, blah, blah. And everybody gets slashed. And I'm standing there reading your first review in the New York Times, being slashed. And I'm going, yeah, well, that's sort of what I thought. and that's that. Okay. Then it turns out some weeks later, it gets re-reviewed by Pauline Kael, who was like the
the new hot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She was like the critic, and she comes out and it makes the top 10 movies of the year as this classic, before Nashville, it was, this kind of new wave thing. But in her review, it said, but there was just something missing. It had a flatness to it. So years later, I'm doing a play, Jules Feiffer play, and I got to meet Jules Feiffer and he cast me. And Don Carpenter lived in Marin and he came and I got like 24 roses or something. And there's a little note on the roses, like 15 years later. And all it said was, you were right.
Awesome.
I know. So,
but did that really make up for it?
It was like, when you're young, I think you have some people have a kind of naturalness that, when you get older, I think you maybe come back to that a little bit, but it takes a long time because it's not that you're beaten down, but you get more aware of it's not proper to do certain things. Mm-hmm. It was like at one point I decided I wanted to write an article about something. And I found the editor of the magazine. It was a magazine. And I thought, if I do an article, they could buy the article rather than a spec script. You know what I mean? I was like trying to figure out the easier way to do something. And I looked up the editor's name and I had an idea for a story. And I called the editor. I didn't know that you don't do that. And a friend of mine was like an editor at Viking or Dutton. And I told her and she said, you called the editor? And I said, yeah. And she picked up. And, when you get older, I could never do, you know what I mean? Yeah. You get layers. And that's why I think circling back to performing arts, I think we didn't have those layers then. And we were of a certain age where we just were open books.
It was fame. You were dancing in the street
That's right.
and everyone wanted to watch you.
We had a channel for something that we would have covered up if we didn't have an outlet. And I really think that kids and people, that it can be such a healthy way, to open yourself up and let out stuff that you wouldn't in life necessarily walk around being. And so you get to sort of, I always felt like if I tried to do anything back then, it would be to connect and touch another person. And so that requires, I think, a certain vulnerability, and not have the lessons that you've learned, or the skill that there's, somebody like you look at Jennifer Lawrence now. I think there's some wonderful younger actresses that are just like off the charts.
Yeah.
And you see her in interviews and stuff, and she has this chutzpah, I don't think she's afraid of being exposed, even when she is exposed or she makes something, she'll say, "Oh my God, I'm a jerk." And you're just drawn to that honesty,
Yeah.
And sometimes even as a director, you can work with somebody and you could say, just stop it, cut it,
Yeah.
Talk to me. Just talk to me. And I had a teacher, I think it was Peggy Fury, and she had a whole following, and I'd never followed anybody because I knew, they were human. And I took one class from her and I sat in, and I was working at that time. So I didn't want to screw around too much with what I was doing. And I got up and I did a scene, and I was used to using my body because of my stage experience, kind of expressing myself. And I was used to accessing things in a certain way, however way that was. And she said, "Okay, stop. She said, I want you to sit there and you cannot move. Just cannot move." And I thought, what is she doing? She's taking away what I know how to do, And she must think I'm terrible. And she was saying to everybody, all these other people, "Oh, you're so great." And I think they weren't that great. And she was like ripping me apart. So I sit there, and, it was a very simple scene that wasn't showy, but had a lot of stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm just not moving. And I start talking, and all of a sudden stuff started coming up that I never even knew was there. And it was like, cut the extraneous stuff, cut that, which is what I felt like was me.
Yeah.
And some deeper place came out.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that. And I've seen some directors work with actors, or I've been directing some, theater stuff, and I watch and they're not getting at certain things. And then I'll go, all right, forget everything. I just need you. You know what I mean? To tell me what's happening here, what's going on. And it's like, it's night and day. You see like this whole other person kind of come out because we have ideas of things. And I said afterwards, it's intimidating when you feel like you're taken down by a teacher like that has such a reputation. And I said afterwards, "Oh my God, she must have thought I was awful." And somebody said, "No, she only does that to people she really
likes,
and
is like,
likes and sees, and I can see that when I'm working with people now, or I used to review plays, and you get excited when you see something in somebody and you think maybe you can bring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really exciting, and you go, okay, don't do that. And it feels like you're kind of cutting them down. I mean, you have to do it in a certain way and you can't do it to everybody. Or when I would review something, when it's not that good or people don't have it, that a lot of times they're not working for money, or they're, what I mean? Yeah. And it's more of a hobby or a wannabe situation. You kind of don't bother because it's not fertile ground. You know what I mean? It's just like, but if you see somebody that has something and you feel you can bring something to it, then it becomes like, oh, wait, I can feel you doing it. That's your thing. I don't want to see your thing. That's your default mechanism.
Yes.
You know how to do that. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, the sort of actor tricks.
When you get nervous, you go into your mode of being, and you have like another face,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's your fail safe. And you do that, I think, a lot on TV, because usually they don't have time. Mm-hmm. You have one take and the director barely talks to you because he doesn't have the time. He's looking at shots. He's looking at the sound, and they basically just have to cast it right and hope that you're there. So you do a one take thing and you move on.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of time, we're going to have to take a break, but I want to come back, and we got to cover the Rockford Files. We got to cover 10 Speed and Brown Shoe.
Okay.
And we'll be back. This message is brought to you by thenextdish.com.
We are living in a time of incredible change. Thenextdish.com is a company that trains innovators to be ahead of the game through courses that help you create in-demand skills every professional should know.
Just for 80s TV Ladies listeners, they are offering a special promotion, an additional 10% off its already 30% off promotion. Use code 8TL24 at checkout when you purchase their newest online course called Be the Disruptor.
TheNextDish.com offers a risk-free 30-day trial. Also, the course never expires, so you can come back anytime you need a refresher.
Don't miss out. This special 80s TV Ladies offer ends February 15th, 2024. Remember, this is the year to invest in yourself. Oh my gosh, you did 2 Rockford Files episodes. Yes. So I'm curious what it was like to work with James Garner and Stuart Margolin, because in one episode you marry him. You marry Angel.
I married Stuart. I married Angel. Well, where to begin? James Garner was absolutely, if possible, even sweeter than he appears. And I do have a tiny, tiny story that links to this. That he was nothing but genuinely a sweetheart. And he said something like he would have probably been a shoe salesman if it hadn't been for Mita Rosenberg, who's his producer and manager, who kind of was his pusher, into the business, because he was that kind of laid back and not that aggressive in that way, but just this kindest person, certainly to me. And I met this guy. I was outside my home many years ago, and he said, "Oh, I saw that you worked with James Garner." And I said, "Yeah, he did." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I met him. He's really awful. He's just this terrible guy." And I said, "Really? I mean, he was so nice to me." And I said, "Why? What happened?" See, you always have to ask. Yes. And he said, "Well, I was on one of the shows and I was doing background, and he was walking by, and I said something to him, and he didn't even turn around. He just kept walking. And who does he think he is?" And I'm thinking, he's walking to do a shot. He might not have even heard the guy. He doesn't know him. And now this guy is telling everybody that Garner is this awful person. Okay? All right, now we have another cut too. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm shooting Payday, and I'm doing Payday, and I'm really nervous. I was getting over, at that time, it was my first thing. I was getting over that pneumonia thing that I had. I was nervous that I could even do it. And I never did a film before. And, you know, you have to hit your mark and you have to do all that. So I was just quiet and focused on what I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like I hit my mark on this line, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Cut to many years later, I'm doing Cry for Help, which was the suicide one, and the Robert Culp suicide. And it was the last shot, and we had just finished. I knew everything was going to be okay, meaning we did everything. And I'm joking around with the crew, you know, because I had to be lying almost dead in the Malibu Ocean, you know,
under the pier,
for
many, many shots,
you know. So I'm joking around, and it's like, you know, we did it. And this older DP, director of photography, comes up to me and said, "Boy, you have changed so much." And I said, "What do you mean?" It turned out he was the original DP on Payday. And Daryl Duke was directing Cry for Help. So he used, you know, like 15 years later. And he said, "You were such a then." And I said, "What? That's not me, you know?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What?" He said, "You didn't even talk to the crew. Like you were above it or something." Above it. I was terrified.
You were 22.
I was 22 and terrified that I didn't even know if I was going to make it. You know what I mean? And I'm shooting a movie. You know what I mean? I was like in the hospital. I was gaunt and scared. And I was like hoping that I didn't get it because I really didn't know. I thought, you see, you can't trust what somebody says about somebody else unless you really, really know this. And he said, "And look at you now. You're kidding and you're joking." I didn't tell jokes to the crew. I was just in my little zone and I was trying to concentrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wasn't secure enough to joke around, and I was trying to, stay in character. And that's what it was like. Boy, she's
stuck up. Like
she's stuck up.
And you're like, I'm 22 and I'm acting opposite Rip Torn.
Who's like flying off the. Okay, you want to hear Rip Torn?
Yes, we do.
Yes, please.
So there was a scene in Payday, and in the scene, and this goes to Sharon, a question that you asked earlier about having potentially, what do you do when you're supposed to do something as an actor, and you run into it. And in the scene, it said that my character cries. And I thought, no, I don't think she should cry. It's not part of the thing. And so, I said to the director before we shot the scene, just to let him know, I said, "I just want you to know I'm not going to cry." He said, "Okay." So, we go to shoot the scene, and I'm doing it the way I thought was the right way to do it. And Rip says, "You're not going to cry?" And I said, no, I'm not, because it's just not going to. And he goes, "Makeup." And he calls makeup over and he goes, "Okay, roll it. Let's do the scene." And they start rolling the camera. And out of the blue, this person in makeup comes along with this thing that blows in your eye. never saw this, never knew about it. And it was like a menthol air.
Oh.
Yeah. I never saw it since or heard of it, but I don't know if other people have used it or what. But the camera's rolling, we're going, and she's blowing this thing in my eye, and tears start coming down my face, and we do the scene. I was so angry.
Yes. Wow.
It was like such a violation, and he said, "Don't worry, honey, you'll probably get like an Academy Award for it," or something like that. And I went back to my Motel 6 room, and I love the director, but he didn't stick up for me because Rip Torn was the movie, and if he exploded and walked off, we didn't have a movie,
Mm-hmm.
And so, those glasses that they have that you drink from in the motel rooms that have the paper stuffed in them?
Mm-hmm.
There are about 5 of them on the vanity, where the sink. I took all 5 of those glasses, went outside the motel, and there was this big brick wall. And I went, wham, wham, wham. And I threw and broke every single one of those glasses. And that was like another one of my healthy moments of how do you get it out, of your system. And that was kind of what happened. And sometimes you see things and you don't know, accidents happen on film, and they're, like in the Julia Roberts, where she played the prostitute, that big film, and that scene where she opens up, right?
And
that was, that was like a mistake, and she just laughed, and that became the go-to moment in the movie. Well, I didn't really cry in that scene, but that's what happened. So,
but they, basically forced you to without your consent,
without my consent,
and out of,
yes,
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so you never know.
There's all kinds of ways to deal with that, and the way that he chose to do it is definitely not anywhere near the top of the list. It's off the bottom of the list. It's kind of crazy.
Some people are very gutsy about it and say, too bad, I'm doing it this way. And then it's very hard. It's like you then might get a reputation, or you might get, canned. People get labels, and you just don't know the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
All right, just to throw back to Rockford Files for a second.
Yes.
The Rattlers episode, the episode where you it was directed by Meta Rosenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
What? Oh, you know what? That's so interesting. I didn't remember that. But we were in a bank once. I was in a bank near Universal, and I was, waiting online, and there was a woman standing behind me, and she said, "Excuse me, you look like an Elayne Heilveil type."
Oh, really?
I didn't know that anybody even knew my name. And it turned out, I said, I am her. And she was Meta Rosenberg.
Oh my.
But the strange thing about that episode is that I had already shot the other one first, the Rattlers or episode. And at that time, unbeknownst to anybody, we were very, very private I was always private in my personal life. I was living with Stuart Margolin.
Oh.
And nobody knew.
Wow.
And out of the blue, I got cast, and he was so nervous about me being cast in something that he was familiar with, that after we shot, and so nobody knew. And
nobody knew what you were shooting.
No, nobody knew after. I mean, nobody ever knew we were living together. And And Stuart, I never, I was always involved with like the other side of nepotism. Nobody wanted to work with anybody they were like with. It was like too, it was too weird. It'd be too weird. It was too fraught, and, either let's be personal or not, so nobody knew. And then, after we shot this scene, he was like butter. We would go to a hotel somewhere on location, and I'd have the TV blasting, and I'd say, should I turn this down? He was learning lines. He says, no. He was one of these like brilliant that he could just look at something and he'd have the lines and he'd direct them. And I would have to be up all night long saying them 80,000 times. But anyway, we were doing this scene, and afterwards, he was really angry at himself. I was so worried about what you were doing that I wasn't thinking about. I was watching you and I wasn't thinking, and I don't even know what I did.
My gosh.
It was sweet, but people get protective and nervous about that. So,
that is so interesting. And then but you married him in the episode. Yes. Was that weird?
Well, no, because we were in such character, and that there wasn't any real reality to it, and we shot it at this little church in Van Nuys. And it was very much like, I was some Armenian daughter with
the
brothers,
sister,
a sister of something, and he was Angel, this wacky, funny character who,
is working a con.
He is working a con, and so I don't think it really had any personal dynamic to it. We were just doing our thing,
Well, what I love is there's like great scenes with just you and James Garner in that episode. Mm. And then there's great scenes with you and
I don't remember any of them, but
because you're like, and it is a somewhat impossible plot to follow.
I was saying I would get these scripts and I never read them fully because I didn't understand them. I just am very bad at figuring out whodunnits, and it was like, I know this is a popular show and we love James Garner, but I can't figure these things out. So I would just read my part and not have to know what was going on anywhere else.
Which was better because the character didn't know what was happening.
I didn't know what was going on.
In general, were you one to watch or rewatch your own work, or did you basically stay away from them after you did
it? Sometimes I would see it like when it was on, but I never, ever, ever told anybody that when something was on, I was just, so I was okay. I'm okay in front of strangers. But people that I know, all the flags go up of not being good enough or being self-conscious. So I never, ever told anybody or publicized anything. And I would maybe watch it once. I once watched dailies, one daily, meaning one day. And it was for this emergency thing that I did.
The show.
Yes, the show. And I wasn't going to do the show because I didn't think anybody like me watched it. And I was wrong. That was I got all this fan stuff saying, I went into this career because of you, and I did, and I went, oh God, people actually saw it. But
it was huge.
I had no idea.
The emergency for those of us that loved it.
I had no idea. And the director, I think, of the show was an Emmy-winning writer, and he had just directed. And I don't think he was like that great as a director. I don't mean in the episode, just in general. He was just starting or something like that. And I said, "How come you're doing it?" And he said, "Well, because I know I can write." It was interesting, but I saw it a daily and I went, oh my God, I thought I didn't look bad in what I saw. And I usually think, oh my God, you look terrible. I thought, I look like I could almost be a model who can't act. I was like, looked okay in that shot, but man, was I bad. You know what I mean? It was like I was dead. And I thought, I think I better either amp it up. You can't, it's so hard when you haven't found your sweet spot when you're not used to, let's say, television. And many years ago, I saw Payday. It was playing at like Grauman's Chinese Theater as some retrospective thing. And I snuck in, and that's when I saw the boob shot for the first time. And I don't know if anybody would notice it. I thought I was completely different in the first half than in the second half. And I think some might say it was better in the first half or worse in the first half. And I think I could see myself acting kind of a little bit in the first half, and I saw myself relaxing a little more in the second half. And it really changes. It's a real art. It's a very cool art, like to find your
spot. Yeah.
Your energy, your spot.
Yeah.
It really is. So yes, that's Rockford.
That's Rockford. Okay. So you also worked with Brian Keith in Hawaii?
Yes.
Did you go to Hawaii for both that and Hawaii Five-0?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Yes. And this was the day when, I don't know now because I haven't been doing it, but man, they treated you really nicely. I mean, everything first class, and you get to the Kahala Hilton, and all kinds of fruit baskets, and yes. And Brian Keith was adorable, and he had to write some prescription for some baby that I had that was deaf, and he was playing a doctor or something. And when he handed me the prescription, he wrote some funny note on it. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, I'm shooting. This is my close-up. Please don't crack me up. And and then the Hawaii Five-0 was the same thing. And Stephen Boyd, who I guess was big in, what was the movie? Hercules, or one of the big, he was a huge star, Spartan, or, one of those things. He couldn't have been lovelier. And he shockingly passed away about 2 weeks after we shot that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But no, it was very lovely. I mean, that they treated, they were really, I don't know what they're doing now, but then it was, they did kind of treat you very well.
I doubt that they're doing quite the same things these days. They really did, was very respectful, and I got to go to Hawaii, and I stayed, and I think Stuart even joined me after one of the Hawaii Five-0s. Yeah. And we stayed for a little while. Oh, that's
okay.
great.
When you were talking with my husband, and I couldn't hear what you guys were saying because you had my headphones. Did you tell him that you were in a relationship with Stuart McGowan?
I don't think so. I don't think we got to that.
Oh my God, he's about to lose his mind. When he listens to this episode,
you're not going to tell him?
I'm never going to tell him. He's got to listen to find out the deep, dark secrets.
All right, then I won't tell him either. But
no, of course I'm going to tell him. I'll last about a day pretending not to tell him.
Stuart was the one who told me when the camera rolled to just do what I wanted to do. And that got me in so much trouble.
Because he could get away with it.
He could get away with it. You had to be really careful with, what position you were in, Yeah. So I'm sure nobody told him anything because he was just so brilliant, no mind, and a sweetheart.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, any memories of shooting that and working with those two actors?
The thing, I think I did it it was very short-lived, right?
Yes, it
I mean,
was.
it was like, what, 6 episodes or so? I don't even remember if it was a season.
It was
not.
a season, but it was a short season. It was 14 episodes. It's, starred Jeff for our listeners, Jeff Goldblum, Ben Vereen. It was created by Stephen Cannell.
Yeah.
And I'm a big Stephen Cannell, Rockford,
Yes.
But it was short-lived, but it's so weird. It's such a weird show.
It really is.
It was very quirky, and I never saw it, actually. But what I do remember is we were sitting on set, and Steve Cannell was sitting there. We were talking, and I think it was the first episode, like really early on, and he said, what's interesting, because they didn't know if the show was going to be picked up or not. And he said, what was really interesting about it was that if it's a flop, the show, it's going to be on the actors, and that they're going to have a hard time after. But writer producers can go on.
Interesting.
And I remember him saying that. When we were having lunch one day, Jeff was there and Ben Vereen was there, and we were talking, and it turned out that Ben Vereen had gone to performing arts and Jeff Goldblum had auditioned for Carnegie and didn't make it.
Oh, a good lunch conversation.
A good lunch conversation. Yeah, but that was that. So
that is fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit about working on the Chinese Prime Minister TV movie and working with Dame Judith Anderson?
Yeah. That was from a play by Enid Bagnold, who wrote The Chalk Garden. And she was an old, solid old playwright. And it was actually for something called Hollywood Television Theater, which was like PBS, one of their special shows. And I got friendly with Dame Judith, and she was living in Santa Barbara, and I'd go up and spend some weekends at her house in Montecito. And she was wonderful. And one day she said she had a beautiful home, and I took pictures of her myself, and have them. And in her garden, she grew vegetables and everything. And she said to me once, I'm getting rid of stuff. She was already older at that point. And she said, just pick anything that you want in my house and take it.
Wow.
Well, I mean, there was a baby grand piano. It's like, hello,
I'll just roll this out the door.
Yeah, don't mind me. I'll just make a phone call to my mover. And so there was this little, I have it in my room, hand painted, like wooden jewelry box that she had. And, I thought, I'm not going to take a portrait of her. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like an oil painting or something. I thought, no, I think I'll just take this little box. And I said, is this okay? And she said, oh my goodness, that they gave me that when I played Hamlet. She played Hamlet.
Wow.
in like Britain and toured as Hamlet. And that was the gift they gave her. So I have this note and this hand painted jewelry box from Dame Judith. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And she had this big designer, like, Louis Vuitton, or, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was just one of those people design the clothes for the show. And I got to wear jeans throughout the whole show. She had gowns, and I got this big designer with jeans. So that was it. But yes, we became very close, and it was a very special relationship afterwards.
How lovely.
That is so cool. Anybody else you worked with that you're like, oh my God, this person was amazing or very, very weird?
Well, we know already one of the possible weird persons. But other than that, I mean, everybody really was menschy, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. And so tell us a little bit about your theater work as a writer and director and actress.
Yeah.
And what you're up to now these days.
Yeah. Well, I kind of am proud of certain things because it's not my first language. It's like I'm speaking a second language, and I never, ever had aspirations to be a writer. I mean, it just sort of happened. It's like, you need something to do, and why not? And so I get to say this just to my close friends. And now that you're going to be
that's right,
my pals, because you know so much about me more than most people now. I get to count. This is a secret because I don't post things. No, it's not. I am in 16. This is just me because it's big. Best of anthologies, like best short plays, best men's monologues, all of that stuff. And I'm really excited and proud, like, to get published in real stuff. And these are like the editors from Samuel French and people that have read everything. So I get to go,
that's good
like,
stuff. That's impressive.
I like whisper that, and go, yes. So, and I did just recently what you saw, Susan, which was a play at Theater West that started out as a short 10-minute piece that was done by this spectacular actress, June Schreiner, who's now she was going to come back and do the full-length play, but she was starring in a movie. And it morphed into a full-length play, but it was also in like Best Women's Monologues of 2020 or something. And it was one long, like 15-minute monologue as a standalone piece. And then I wrote a lot more of those monologues and put it together as a full length. And just recently kind of had that read, of like a staged reading of that.
And it's called
Nighty Night. And it takes place in the bayou with kind of images of darkness and subconscious things going on. And I love kind of that whole milieu of the South and the stories and motifs of the like monsters in the mud, in the swamp land. So I'm doing 2 short comedies now just to get my brain out of that place. And it's going to be in a festival at Theater West. So I've kind of come full circle with starting out in the theater, and then it's kind of like coming back home. I didn't do a lot of it when I was doing more television and things like that, but it really does feel like you get to write and say longer speeches. Mm-hmm. You get to talk more.
Well, and I think one of the great things about you writing monologues, it makes a lot of sense because those are usually just very important training and learning for actors, right?
Yes.
And having been an actor, you know what it is to break down a monologue. You know what it is to find your way through a monologue. And so approaching that as a writer must be just a really amazing thing.
I really, really think that writing and directing now, if you get blessed enough to work with good actors, so trust their instincts about if they can't say it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Then there's something usually wrong with the way it's written. And I write in a kind of rhythm in the way that I hear it said, and you kind of listen,
All right. And you're very private. So can people find you somewhere, or
no,
you don't have a website?
No. And I've had people say, I'll do a website for you, because they've seen it. And I go, no, it's okay. It's okay. But they can email me.
Thank you so much for sharing all these amazing stories with us and your journey. It's been really great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful meeting you and talking.
It's been a lovely conversation, and we can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
For our audiography for today, I want to recommend 2 books that are out now or about to be out. So Fetch, The Making of Mean Girls and Why We're So Obsessed with It, by Jennifer Keeshan Armstrong. Jennifer wrote the amazing book When Women Invented Television, and we hope to interview her this year for 80s TV Ladies.
Also, you can pre-order Stan Zimmerman's book, The Girls, From Golden to Gilmore. It is releasing February 13th.
Some walk by night, some fly by day, moonlighting strangers who just met on the way.
That's right, dear listeners. In light of Moonlighting coming to streaming, we are kicking off a series of episodes with our very special guest, the creator of Moonlighting himself, Mr. Glenn Gordon Caron. You do not want to miss this special interview.
No, you don't. You do not want to miss this special interview. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't.
She's my sister and my daughter.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century. See you next time.